A question that I just asked about a boss or a teacher that you know likes you or doesn't like you, the same thing happens in your relationship with God. The same thing is happening in your relationship with God. Ultimately, if your image of God is a boss who doesn't like you, a leader, a teacher who's trying to catch you doing wrong, if your idea of God is someone who is ultimately unjust or stern in the way that he's already decided against you, if that's your image of God, then all of the things that you just said about a boss that doesn't like you will be true about your relationship with God. You will be living in a kind of uncomfortable fear. You will be looking for ways to put distance between you and God. You will be unmotivated to live well, to perform well. You will be resentful of God's unjust behavior or attitude towards you. You won't feel safe or able to be yourself. On the other hand, if your image of God is of someone who genuinely likes you, if you are actually convinced that he likes me, that will do in you all of the things that we just described, it will motivate you to live better. It will create a better relationship between you and God. You will feel safe and able to be yourself. You will be motivated in such a way that you don't want to hurt or offend God, not out of fear that he's going to catch you doing wrong, but because you want to please the one who loves you. What you think about God, when you answer the question, what does God think about you, is, I think, the most important thing about you. When I ask the question, what does God think of you? The answer that comes to your mind when you answer that question, what does God think of you? That answer is, I think, the most important thing about you. That is going to influence the way that you approach relationships with other people, the way that you think about your ultimate destiny, the way that you understand your purpose for life in the world. I want to look at a parable of Jesus that addresses this question and talk about what I think is some of the building blocks, the elements of a Christian response to that question. What does God think of you? Let's open up to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 begins with a series of 3 parables. There is a parable of the lost sheep, a parable of the lost coin, and a parable of the lost son. The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. We want to look at that last parable in the series, the parable of the lost son. Luke chapter 15, beginning in verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. So Jesus has told already a parable about a lost sheep and the joy of finding a sheep that has been lost. He's told a parable about the lost coin and the celebration from finding something valuable that has been lost. And now he's telling a parable about 2 sons. Why are there 2 sons in the parable? Jesus tells a parable about a father with 2 sons because he is speaking to 2 different audiences in this crowd. And to see that, we can look at Luke 15, verses 1 and 2. So flip back or take a look at Luke 15, verses 1 and 2 to identify the 2 audiences that Jesus is addressing in this crowd. Luke 15, verse 1, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So you picture Jesus teaching. Maybe he's standing like I'm standing now, or he's sitting on a rock somewhere, and there are Crowds gathered around him, the sinners and tax collectors, the unworthy, the rejected, the isolated and alone, the people who are otherwise outcasts in society. They know that they are accepted by this man, and they crowd around him because of it. They want to listen to him. They want to be near him. They're crowding around the feet of Jesus. And then at the outskirts of this crowd, the second audience, arms folded across their chests, trying to catch Jesus doing something wrong. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the religious leaders of their day. Two audiences in this crowd. And so, two sons in the parable. In the parable of the lost son, the older son represents the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. These men judgmentally standing at the edge of the crowd. And the younger son represents the sinners and tax collectors. These rejected people, these people who feel unworthy by society, and they are interested in what Jesus has to say. Jesus tells a parable that will address both of their needs. He has something to say to both of these audiences in this crowd. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Now, in 2021, when we read this parable, we can sometimes miss the punch. We can miss the weight of what has just happened at the beginning of that parable. Imagine a family, a Middle Eastern family, a first century Jewish Middle Eastern family, where the younger son says to his dad, "Dad, we both know that one day you're going to die. And when you do, I'm going to get some money, right? Why don't we just say, you're dead? And can I have that money now?" That's what's going on here in this conversation. Let's just call you dead now because I would like my inheritance, Dad. Maybe you've got siblings. Can you imagine your younger sibling saying that to your father? That's what's going on here. And what does the father do? So he divided his property between them. He gives it to him. This is a scandalous parable right from the very first words. The younger son says to his dad, "You're dead to me anyway. I would like my inheritance now, please." And the father gives it to him. But can you imagine the next few days, the next few weeks? Because we're not talking about making a withdrawal from the ATM. Or what happens here is a piece of the land is going to get sold off and the yard is a little bit smaller now. And some of the furniture has now been sold, so the moving company is coming in and taking away one of the sofas and the big screen TV. And some of the livestock have been sold off, and there's one less car in the driveway. And you, the older brother, looking at this happening, watching your brother, get all of this money because he's considered his own father dead, and his father has given it to him. Jesus continues, verse 13. "Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, and he set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living." This is what was so urgent that this young boy had to consider his dad dead, get his inheritance early. What is it? What was his urgent business? To squander it all in wild living. Drugs, booze, sex, that's what he's looking for. That's what's so important. Imagine the two audiences here in Jesus' parable. You've got the sinners and tax collectors right up here in front. You've got the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, back there in the crowd. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law are now angry, The sinners and tax collectors here around Jesus' feet, they're feeling a little guilty. This sounds like them. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. Now the Pharisees and teachers of the law are saying, see? That's right. Amen. That's what's supposed to happen when you live that way. Spent it all, he's got nothing left. Good for him. Let him suffer. Verse 50. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now, even the Pharisees and teachers of the law at this point, they are squirming a little bit because that's harsh. That's harsh. This son of a wealthy father, now having spent everything in wild living, he, for the first time in his life, has to get a job and work. And not only is he going to get a job and work, he's going to care for pigs. Now, in a first century Jewish home, you wouldn't even say the word pig without apologizing for it first. You wouldn't think about pigs, you wouldn't touch pigs, you certainly wouldn't feed pigs. Here he is, desperate and feeding pigs. And it gets worse. Verse 16, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. He's hungry. He is desperate. So desperate that he wants pig food. And he can't even eat pig food. There is none for him. So now the teachers, the sinners and tax collectors around Jesus, they're feeling for this kid. Ooh. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, not sure that they can even celebrate anymore because that just is harsh. Verse 17. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? So, this young boy realizes, I'm starving, but my father's got all kinds of servants. He feeds them. He doesn't think that he could ever be counted again as the son. He's already spent his right to be a son, but he thinks I could manipulate my father. He won't let me starve. I could at least be like one of his workers, like one of the servants on the farm. I will go back to my father. I will set out, verse 18, and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he's preparing a speech. The kid practices a speech. Imagine trying to rehearse the speech in front of the mirror. What am I going to say? What's the right tone of voice? What's the right facial expression? Because I want my dad to give me a job or to give me some food so I won't starve to death. He is trying to manipulate his father so that he can save his own life. He's not, I think, motivated here by genuine repentance. He's motivated by his empty stomach. And so, verse 20, he got up and went to his father. Imagine that long journey, that long way home, practicing the speech, hungry and having spent everything, and a desperate attempt to not die, and working on this speech he has prepared. But imagine being home now. Imagine being the older brother. And all this time, we don't know how long the younger son was away, but a long time, as we'll see in a bit. Imagine being the older brother and the resentment that has built up, knowing what your younger brother has done to your family. The shame that he has brought to your dad. The whispers and rumors that people say to each other that you can barely hear in the marketplace when you walk by them, that's the guy whose son left him for dead. Imagine what you would feel like thinking about your younger brother. But the father in this parable continues to wait for the boy. The father has apparently been pacing the yard and looking out the window and looking down the road, waiting for the return of his son. He has not given up on him. He continues to wait for the son. He wants him back. Even though he has spent everything, even though he has treated his father this way, he wants his son back. Imagine being the older brother thinking, Dad, just give up on him. Let him go. Let him die already. But that's not what happens. In fact, in all of the Bible, God is described as doing all kinds of things. We see God in the Bible defending his people. We see him caring for his people. We see him feeding, and we see him fighting. We see him weeping, and we see him rejoicing. We even see God dancing. But there's only one verse in all of the Bible, one place in all of Scripture where God is described as running. It's this verse. These verses 20 and 21. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and kissed him. This is not what the boy was expecting. He did not consider that he could possibly be received by his father as a son again, that he could even be welcomed to the house. He was prepared to manipulate his father to just get enough food to not starve. And the father, while the son is still a long way off, he sees him down the road. He picks up his robe and he tucks it into his belt and he tears down the road in his sandals. And the servants are behind him, trying to catch up. What's going on? The old man has lost it. There he goes. He's running down the road. And for what? What is he running for? For this boy. For you, who do not deserve to be called his son. He runs down the road. He sees you from a long way off. He goes to embrace you, to kiss you, to receive you back home as his child. That's where he runs to. The son has had his entire world turned upside down in this moment. The son is now discovering that he did not ever, in fact, know his father. The father receives him. The son doesn't know what to do. He starts in on his speech. He begins the speech that he had prepared. The son said to the father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But he doesn't even get to finish. The father interrupts him. The father says, Quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Best robe belongs to the father. Bring my robe. Put it on him. He's not just being received back as a servant. This is my robe. Put it on him. This one could not have expected this. Imagine that moment being received back with the kind of love that this father is showing, thinking that you were going to have to manipulate him, thinking that you were going to have to lie and cheat. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. A ring carries the family seal, a signet ring, the authority to seal documents with the family's name. This is not a servant. This is my son. Servants, don't wear sandals. They work barefoot. This is my son. Where does the father run to? He runs to get you back. He sees you down the road a long way off, even when you have no intention of joining him back as his child. He is going to get you. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Not only does this boy get received back as a son, but they're going to celebrate his return, not a quiet, well, just forget about all of that and don't worry. Shh. There's a party here. He was lost and is found. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. Imagine here being the older brother, and you come home from work. You pull up to the house, but there's no room to park. You got to park around the corner because all of the street is filled with cars. You get out of your car and approach the house, and you hear the beat. Dance music. A DJ truck. And the music is coming from your house. There's a caterer parked across the street. He's coming in one of these trays with little hot dogs on sticks. Falafel. Or jollof rice, yeah. And you stop the guy on the way in. What's going on? What's happening? And the waiter says, well, your brother's come home. Can you imagine? Verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the field where older sons are supposed to be. He came near the house. He heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied. And your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry. And he refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. In the parable, we see that the younger son has never really known his dad. He didn't really know the love of his father. He thought that he had worked himself out of sonship. He thought that he had strayed so far that he could not be considered son anymore. Did not know the unconditional love of his father. But the older son, having lived all these years with his father, has also never known him. He does not know his dad. And so he refuses to go in. He won't celebrate the return of his brother. He wishes him dead. Not going to join a party welcoming him home. The father, the gracious father, he could have just said, fine, stay outside and pout. I remember when I was 3-4 years old, my mother liked to remind me of these stories. When I would get really angry with my parents, I would say to my mom, Mom, that's it! I'm not playing with my toys anymore! Okay. But the father's reaction here, when the son refuses to go in, the father comes out and pleads with him. He could just let him go, but he will not. Verse 29, but he answered his father, look, all these years I have been slaving for you, and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Jealousy, comparison, resentment. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father said, You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. As you hear that story, maybe you can relate to the younger son, and you are the younger son. The Father has seen you down the road. He has taken off after you. He has looked to embrace you, to bring you home, to welcome you home as son, as daughter, even when you don't deserve it, and you don't deserve it. But you are also the older son. Maybe you can relate to seasons in your life or moments this week when you have lived in comparison and resentment. At least I'm not like that guy. I remember when I was 14 years old. The first time I was going to take a trip overseas. I'd heard about this exchange program, a summer exchange program. That we could go and spend a month in France, living with a French family. And that sounded so exciting to me. I'd been learning French in middle school, 7th and 8th grade. And so I told my mother about this program. We did not have that kind of money. And my mother said, well, if you can raise $300, 1988, that was a lot of money. That will be enough for the plane ticket. If you can raise the $300 for the plane ticket, I'll cover the rest of it for you, my mother said. Now, I have an identical twin brother. So my twin brother and I were both interested in this exchange program. And my mother, of course, said the same thing to him. So we started working. Maybe you've seen in the movies paper boys delivering newspapers. And that's exactly what I did. I delivered the Hartford Courant in the morning. Woke up 5 o'clock every morning that school year. Delivered the Hartford Courant. Got my newspaper delivered all the way up my steep hill on my road. Put the paper bag on my scooter. Scooted up the hill. Delivered papers all morning. From 5 o'clock till had to be out by 6:30. Hour and a half in the morning before school. And then the Bristol Press every afternoon. So I delivered 2 newspapers early in the morning, right after school. By the end of the school year, I had the money. I'd raised $300. Now my brother, he delivered just the Bristol Press in the afternoon. Relaxed mornings, waking up at 7:30. By the end of the school year, it was not a surprise that he had not quite raised $300. He had raised some, but not enough. It's time to buy the plane tickets, and so my mother sits us down in the kitchen and says, Ryan, so proud of you. You worked hard this school year. You raised that $300. I'm going to cover the rest. We're going to buy your ticket. You can go on this program to France. Chris, didn't quite get there, but we're going to buy your ticket anyway. And I got up from that chair. I went to my room. They had these accordion doors that don't slam. It was so unsatisfying. Sat on my bed. And it was one of the most significant 15 minutes of my life. As I had to come to terms with a lesson that has never left me. My brother getting to go to France doesn't cost me anything. I don't lose anything by my brother receiving grace. That if I cannot live my life in such a way that is able to celebrate when my brother gets something good that he does not deserve, then that's my fault, not his. That's the lesson that Jesus is teaching the Pharisees and the teachers of the law at the edge of this crowd. The sinners and tax collectors, they relate to that younger son. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they have now been stung by the lesson of this parable. Because they can see that they are just like this older son standing outside the crowd, standing outside the house. And Jesus has come out to plead with them, come on in. They are welcome. Did they come in? Did the older son eventually join the party? It's left open. Jesus leaves it open. He is inviting the Pharisees and the teachers of the law to recognize that God welcomes these sinners and tax collectors as well, that they lose nothing by sinners and tax collectors receiving the grace of God that neither of them deserve. You today can relate to the younger son, and you can relate to the older son. More than that, of course, the point of the parable is not to be the younger son or the older son. Jesus gives us this parable so that we will learn to love like the Father. Yeah, you are the younger son, and you are the older son. But you are also the Father. And you can love like him. To do that, you first, I think, need to recognize that you are loved by him. It is, I think, to the degree that you will receive the love of the Father, that you will recognize that you are loved by the Father, that's the degree to which you will be able to love like him. God loves you, whether you like it or not. You can do nothing to change it. He loves you. He is right now loving you. That's not a theoretical, abstract kind of idea. He is right now loving you. There is nobody in the world that could hear me say that for whom it would not be true. He is right now loving you. God doesn't love you because you're valuable. You are valuable because he loves you. You hear the difference there? When I say that God doesn't love you because you're valuable, he's not scrambling his brain. He's not trying to figure out something good enough in you to love. He loves you. And that is why you are valuable. The ultimate answer to the question, who am I? I am the one who is loved by the Father. And if you could spend your life answering that question that way, that will take years. I will spend my whole life chasing after that answer, digesting it, realizing the depth of it. There will never be something deeper, something more significant in your life than that you will realize then that you are loved by the Father. Who am I? I am the one the Father loves. That's who you are. What makes me valuable? He loves me. It's not the job that I do. It's not that I am a teacher or a pastor or a father or a boss. It's not that I'm a son or a brother. It's not about my nationality or my gifts or abilities. It's not my education or my experience. I am loved by the Father. That's who I am. Whether you like it or not, that's who you are. Spend some time in that parable. Spend some time digesting the truth. You are the one the Father loves. Let that truth answer for your soul the question, who am I? And I think that's the degree to which you will be able to love the way the Father loves.